Hi Mushers! I could make this video really short and easy on myself by simply saying, if you are not a mountain biker, you need to know that the fundamental skills for that sport are exactly what you need for more fun and safety for dog-powered biking. So go take a class and live happily ever after, right? But we all have limited resources for time and money, so I think it deserves discussion on why and how those skills apply to bike touring so that you feel inspired to invest in practice, either self-led and hopefully also coach-led as well as needed. First up, if you already know how to use one finger braking with continuous brake coverage and don't shy away from using both of your brakes for bike touring, you're off to a great start. For those that didn't know about that or just haven't taken the time to try to make the switch yet, I can't overemphasize how important those things are, because long-term mastery takes a lot of practice, but just knowing how to use my levers better was the most important thing for me, and it took the smallest amount of practice time per benefits that I gained, so it was really worth putting in the time to make that change. I have several videos on brakes and braking already that can help you get started if you're like many people that have heard that front brakes are dangerous, and also that locking up a rear wheel indicates a powerful brake and faster stopping time, because both of those myths will actually leave you severely underpowered for braking power and really compromise your traction, which you need for both slowing or stopping and for turning. Rear biased braking will lead you to skidding a lot more going downhill or while cornering, and that leads to dabbing a foot or even washing completely out of the corner or needing to bail more often, and of course, worst case, needlessly crashing. So even if you're an otherwise pretty advanced bike tourer, if you make those switches in braking habits so that you're using both brakes with the finesse of one finger control, you'll laugh in confused delight when you're running a dog downhill and realize how much more relaxed you can be while still controlling your speed and keeping traction for all the other things that you need to do. Brakes that are set up well, maintained well, and used properly really do function a lot better than most people are aware that they can with the pulling power of a dog or two involved. So if you haven't yet made the switches to that type of precision braking, do it now. No matter what level you're at, it'll also have benefits like cleaning up some of that unintentional communication through the gang line that your dog is getting when you're not braking concisely and smoothly. And just that timid dragging of the brakes that we do when we're worried that we won't be able to slow down later if we don't start slowing down already now, it just transmits a lack of trust to our dogs and confidence. And the more skills and confidence we can add, it just builds the trust between you and your team, unless you have even more fun. The other thing that stood out to me, in contrast to my previous biking experience growing up and my self-taught scootering experience once I took a mountain biking class, was just how important standing coasting is to controlling a bike off-road. Obviously, I stood when I was riding my scooter, and I stood up to pedal if I wasn't quite in the right gear and I needed to mash on the pedals harder. But standing and coasting with level pedals is actually a really important basic default position to be in for off-road riding so that you can brake and maneuver more easily with more traction and more control. It isn't a static position since the terrain underneath you will be changing and your bike will be pivoting underneath you, but you'll often return to more of a centered, taller position between instances of needing to, say, dip a pedal in corners or get lower for more stability. If that's not second nature for you yet, to be standing to do a lot of the braking and control of your bike, solo practice without the dog first will let you focus so that you can explore and feel where you are in relationship to your bike as it pivots over the terrain underneath of you, and you're concentrating on keeping your head stable. The more the terrain varies, the more you'll use the range of motion in your arms and legs and hips to adapt to where that changing center is on the bike that lets you keep traction on both the front and rear tires for control, for again both braking and turning where you need extra traction as compared to just going straight. So what that means is that often the center that gives you the best traction and control between both tires will be in what looks like the visual center of the bike. But again, when your terrain is a little bit more extreme, uphill or downhill, your body will shift. So it may shift quite far forward uphill, even just briefly if you're getting up a ledge or something like that. And when you're going downhill, it will often shift rearward to a certain extent. But the one thing to make sure you watch out for is don't fall into that trap of hearing the advice to just get back and low and take that to mean a static position that you're holding and staying in long term, because really emergency stops would be a good example. If you're really piling on the brakes for a really heavy stopping effort, you may be very far rearward and low on your bike to resist the forces that are continuing to throw you forward while your bike slows down. But then once you have slowed down and come to a stop, you're going to come right back to a more central position so that you're not hanging off of the back of your bike and making that front wheel too light for you to steer as necessary. If you're in the process of feeling out what a good balanced position is for you on the bike in different varying terrain, and you're having concerns or actual issues with staying on your pedals and not slipping the pedals, don't forget what I mentioned in prior videos about mountain bike flat pedals with metal traction pins in them, and trying to choose better shoes or shoes specifically meant to interface with those flat pedals, because you'll get just that much more grip. But of course, like we know, we're still talking about traction here and our skills and not just buying the traction with tires. We also can't just buy all of our grip on the pedals. You need to try to emphasize the weight going through your feet to help you keep grip on your pedals. But something else additional that I also tell my kids is kind of a little joke between us. I say, squish the bug. So it means to put pressure down and give a little twist on those traction pins, and that'll lock you in even more. And of course, as adults, we can also understand that part of that equation is our core control and overall body tension, because you are placing opposing forces between your pedals and your handlebars, because otherwise anytime anyone went airborne on a bike, they would lose contact with the pedals. So whether you are on the ground or in the air, there is some of that opposition force too that is also holding you onto the pedals. So make sure that you're remembering to be conscious of those things if you need a little bit of extra grip. This next skill gives both a physical and a mental edge, so it is great to practice under the right circumstances. So depending on how well your bike is sized for you and your height relative to the wheel diameter of your bike, you'll have a moderate to really big concern about getting on and off of a bike that has a very excited dog attached to it. Getting on mostly comes down to good dog training and keeping your seat down or using the dropper post if you have one. So the getting off part, there are two categories of unplanned departures, we'll say. So the first one is imminent crash situations where you're going moderate to high speed and you just absolutely have to get free of the bike now because you know you are going to crash and you can't be tangled up in the frame and adding to your injuries. So you'll want to try to get completely free of the bike and land running or tucked and rolling to try to dissipate some of that energy. But that can be really dangerous to practice, and obviously it usually leads to bike damage as well. Some of it really expensive damage, especially because if I'm having to bail, I'm probably also just chucking the bike sideways, even into a tree or a rock, to avoid having it follow right directly after my dog and risking them as well. So I don't really recommend you practice that. What I do recommend practicing getting comfortable with for that physical and mental confidence boost is the dreaded stall and fall. So suddenly your dog stops and starts sniffing because they're distracted, or they have to take a poo, or you don't have quite enough pedaling power plus pulling power to make it up a hill, and you stall out. You can't keep balance just from forward momentum alone, and especially in those occasions where you're stopping uphill, which seems like that's always when the poo stops happen unexpectedly, or when you run out of power, you'll have one or both of the wheels that are at a very different height than the ground where you need to put your feet down. So you're very unlikely to be able to just simply put your feet down and stand over your top tube. You also might not be able to use the next common just reflex action way to bail, which is tipping to the side and landing on one foot. Because if that's a longer distance than usual, again, because of obstacles or uphill, downhill situation, or there's literally rocks or tree branches and things in your way, it can be really difficult or risking injury to land on just one foot. So that's where a jumping style bail comes in, to land on both feet. So you really need to practice that solo and in very tame conditions first before that's going to be a good, helpful, automatic reflex when it happens to need to happen out on the trail. Jumping bails or jumping dismounts are actually really fun to do, which is in huge contrast to, stopping and awkwardly smacking into your top tube and then your dog pulls your seat into one of your kidneys, or you risk other injuries trying to bounce around on one foot. And then, of course, if you end up all the way on the ground and bruising self and pride, then your dog might pull your bike over you like a speed bump. So what you're looking for is to gain more confidence by knowing that you've practiced something to do instead of that. There is also a different method that you'll want to make your default go to if you're starting downhill and realize that you're not prepared for what's in front of you. So go check out some of the links I have in the description. All right, so I'm gonna call halftime here, but be sure to jump over to part B because that is where we're gonna be talking more about cornering, small obstacles, and a slow speed skill that you might not have thought to practice, but that can be very handy. So subscribe and follow along.